Hey, thank you for tuning into my new series called How I Made It. Basically, I'm going to be going through projects that I have released to show how I made it. Uh, this whole series is kind of inspired by Nicky Romero and Lost Frequencies. They do a lot of videos like this on their YouTube channels, and I know I'm not as good a producer as they are, but I still feel like you can take something and learn from anybody at any level because everybody has their own way of doing things. So you can always take something from it. So that's why I am doing this, even though I'm not a professional. Um, so this project that I'm going over is for the remix that I just did for Music by Lukas, his track Still in Love. This was a remix competition on Spinnin Records, and I did end up finishing 29th place in the competition, which I'm pretty happy with. I was only in the competition when there were 3 days left to go, so I'm pretty happy with the result I got. So I'll get into the project right now. To start off, I'll go over probably like what would be considered the main piece of the track, the drop. So this is what it sounds like. So yeah, I'm going to break down all the different elements to this drop. First, I'm going to start out with the percussion. So this is the percussion is very simple throughout the entire track. Normally, I would do a lot of things like fills in my drops, but for this remix, I really just wanted to keep it very simple, and there's nothing wrong with simple. In my opinion, it works in this track. So this is the percussion to the drop. There's this crash cymbal on the initial hit just to make the first hit of the drop a lot more powerful. Other than that, it's just a simple 4 on the floor kick with a clap on every 2 and 4 beat. Halfway through, more percussion comes in. We get a shaker and a hat topper. And then also, kind of going along with the kick, we have this tom loop. And it just kind of adds more rhythm to the percussion. It kind of works with the kick. So then you don't just have the steady 4 on the floor going the entire time. There's a little bit more variation. And that's one thing I do with this track, because I left the percussion so simple. Having something like that, it makes it less boring where it's simple. Next, I'm going to go over the effects. Again, just like I did with the percussion, I kept the effects very simple on the drop. I normally do more, but I just really wanted to go for a very simplistic remix for this project particularly. So this is what we have for the effects. So yeah, we have these two impacts on the initial hit of the drop and halfway through the drop. It kind of adds more punch, gives it more power. And then we have this uplifter to transition into the second impact hit halfway through the drop. And then this riser comes in halfway through to kind of build up power as the drop moves along. So that's the percussion and the effects. Next I'm going to go over the bass. So this remix was very deep house, future house, motivated. So I went with that type of bass line, really, uh, that type of sound, that type of rhythm. There are 3 layers to my bass. There's this one. You'll also notice that this one is actually a Melbourne bounce preset. You don't have to stick with the genre that certain sounds are intended for. You can kind of use them in other settings, and that kind of adds to uniqueness. Creates a new sound, I guess you can say. Um, it's just a way of thinking outside the box, really. Next, I have the sub bass. So really there are 4 layers that work together on the bass. There's the 3 top layers, and then there's the sub bass, which carries all the low end. Next, I'm going to go over these rolling chords that play throughout the drop. They follow the same chord progression as the piano that's playing. This particular sound is not very noticeable in the drop. It's really just background noise that I use to kind of fill in empty space. So this is what it sounds like. You'll notice I also automated the cutoff filter on this also. And like I said, I wanted to go for a very simplistic remix on this. So doing things like changing up your sounds in the drop by automating the filters and just modulating them, or automating the modulations and different things like that, that is one way you can add complexity where you have simplicity to really make your song more interesting. So halfway through the drop you can hear the filter open up a little bit. And then it really opens up here at the end. I also automated the reverb right here just to help transition from drop to the break. Next, what I'm going to cover is the vocals that I have on the drop. These vocals kind of come from the original song. These were the drop vocals from the original song. I kind of cut them out and pasted them here. I did put a little bit of processing plugins on them to change the sound a little bit and to fit my remix better, but for the most part they come from the original. So all I really did here to change up the sound is I took some distortion to give it more power in the drop. I used this plugin on it, and I know this is a plugin that's meant to be used for guitars. The reason I use this on here is simply just for the delay. I wanted to put a ping pong delay effect on it, and I just used this guitar delay from the Guitar Rig plugin from Native Instruments. And I know that's not really... You don't necessarily have to use plugins the way that they're intended to be used. That's another thing, like I said earlier, thinking outside the box, doing something different, just to change things up. And it still works in the end. It doesn't make it sound bad in any way. It doesn't really matter what you do to your sound, as long as it works in the end. That's what's important, really. There are no rules to producing music other than keep your kick, sub bass, and mono always. That's probably the one rule you should follow. But other than that, it's all personal. It's all what you decide to do. Other than that, I also put reverb on the vocals. I EQ'd the lows out to make more room for the other sounds in the drop, and just raise the highs a little bit too. And then I also just sidechain them. I don't use Nicky Romero's Kickstart for sidechaining. I actually use Logic's stock compressor, and I link it to a ghost kick channel. Basically, I just have a very small kick sample playing where I want the sidechain to be happening. I have it so that there's no output on the signal, so then the ghost kick itself can't be heard. But then I route my compressor to the ghost kick channel so it ducks every time the kick hits. And that is how I always handle my sidechaining. This next element I'm going to go over in the drop is this kind of background support lead that I used. I made this sound in Sylenth 1. So here's what it sounds like. So that's another thing like what I mentioned before. By adding sounds like this into the background, that's another thing like adding complexity where you have simplicity to make your sound more interesting. What I did to this is I automated the reverb just to increase the wet signal, decrease the dry signal, so then it really has a strong tail as the actual lead sound comes to an end. And then I also have an LFO on the pitch for this sound, but at the initial hit you can't really hear the pitch moving around until it gets closer to the end of the sound. That's because I automated the gain of the LFO, so you can watch it kind of move up and down here. You'll hear the pitch get a little bit wavier, I guess you could say. And the last element I'm going to go over for this drop is the main driving element of the drop, which is the piano. So this piano obviously sounds very thin on its own, and the way the drop sounds so full is just all the different sounds mixed together. So I actually had to do a bit of processing on this piano to give it the powerful dance piano sound that it has. If I take all these processing plugins off and just play it as it is, it'll sound a bit different. And the key to making a powerful dance piano like this, it starts before you actually get to the whole processing. If you open up the MIDI here, every single note that I am playing is all at maximum velocity. And also it's all in the rhythm too. Dance pianos typically have a pretty distinct rhythm that you wouldn't really hear somebody playing like on a classical piano. So to really shape this sound, I put Pumper from WA Productions on it. That I use the punchy setting on the compressor just to add more punch to it. I really push the saturation on it, just to I don't even know how to describe it, but really what a saturator is doing is it's kind of adding frequencies to make it sound better. And then I also well, that's a terrible description of what a saturator does, but it's adding frequencies really to, I guess you could say, make it sound fuller. That's probably a better description than what I just said. I also pushed the stereo image knob up a little bit just to make it wider. After that, I EQ'd it to really cut out the lows to leave a lot of room here for the bass. And then I pushed up the highs a little bit too. That kind of makes the transient a little bit powerful. I put this limiter on it just to make it a little bit louder. I have a delay on it, which kind of adds to the rhythm. The wet signal is down a bit though, so when you play it, it's not as noticeable, but it does add to the rhythm. This is just a filter I have for the build-up. So yeah, you can hear that kind of opening up as the track builds up, and then the reverb, I have on this piano is linked to a bus. So yeah, I just have the reverb plugin on here completely with the dry signal all the way muted. The wet signal is as loud as it can be. And then I EQ that reverb signal. So then I only got the frequencies I wanted out of it. And then I sidechained the reverb signal itself to the kick, so then that's not interfering with the kick, because the kick is really the driving part of your track when it comes to dance music. So you want that to cut through the mix, which is the entire reason why you sidechain. In the second drop, it's very similar to the first. The only thing that changes is we have this melody come in that's being played by a pluck, and then this percussion that I had coming in halfway through the drop, that plays throughout the entire drop. Halfway through, I also have this ride cymbal and this hat come in. You can see that I have my ride cymbal panned a little bit to the right and the hat panned a little bit to the left. That just makes the drums sound wider. I also have the ARP that came in halfway through this drop play throughout the entire drop, and I just realized I forgot to kind of cover that ARP, so this is just what it sounds like. That is also following the same chords that the piano is playing, just like the bass is. The bass is playing the bass notes of the chords that the piano is playing. And then, like I said, I have this melody come in. So that's a pluck I made in Silent. I use a lot of Silent on my tracks. It's a plugin that I really like, and ever since I first bought it, I've been using it a lot in every single song I make. I did quite a bit of processing to this sound also, but the main plugins that are noticeable are going to be the delay and the reverb, and those kind of really add body to the sound. So I can add each sound one by one just to show what they do. So yeah, I start with Pumper. I didn't push this plugin too much, or as much as I did with the piano. I did make it a little bit wider with the stereo imager. I did push the saturation up a little bit, and I did try to make I did try to bring out the punch in it with the compressor set to the punchy setting. OTT, I did not apply this too strongly. I kind of put it on there to give the sound more power. This is the delay plugin I'm using by Valhalla. The reverb is from Logic's stock reverb plugin, Space Designer. And this is honestly my favorite reverb plugin to use. I like the sound of it, and I like all the control you have with it too. It has its own EQ on it, so that you can shape the sound of your reverb and everything. There's a filter on it. There's just so much control you have with this. That's just something I like about it, and I like the sound that it produces also. With this EQ, I'm just cutting out the lows to leave more space for my lower sounds, and that gives the pluck its own space in the mix. Then I have it sidechained, and this is just another filter for the build-up. So yeah, you can hear that opening up on the build-up. Just like I mentioned with my rolling chords, I also automated the cutoff on this sound, and that just, you'll hear it opening up as it goes through the drop, and that it serves the same purpose as I said earlier. It adds more complexity where you have simplicity. And I know I keep saying that a lot. It's probably getting annoying. But yeah, so you can hear it opening up as the melody goes along. So yeah, like I said, I made that sound in silent. And then halfway through the drop, this melody continues, and then it's also played by another layer, which is like this whistle lead. And this whistle sound it's gotten pretty popular. It's used by a lot of big artists like Mike Williams, Mesto, Martin Garrix. Mike Williams does this a lot, and that's kind of where my inspiration for using the sound came in. Where like he'll have his main leads playing the sound through the drop, and then halfway through the drop, that whistle lead will come in and it will play the same melody as the leads. And it adds more to the sound. It helps to build energy through the drop, because if you have the same thing playing constantly throughout the drop, it's going to get boring. You need to add variation. You need to build power as it goes. Because if you just have power on that first hit, it's really easy to get bored of it. But if you have the power continuing to build up, it's so much more interesting. It sounds so much better. And normally you would do that with percussion, but like I said, I kept my percussion very simple on this song. So the way I make my sound more interesting as the drop goes along is I add more melodic sounds. This whistle lead, I also made it using one of Logic's stock plugins. This is a synth called Alchemy. Then I also EQ'd it. This EQ, it's just here to get rid of some of the resonating frequencies I was hearing, and that's just to clean up the sound and make it sound better. I spread it, made it wider in the mix, and that when you spread certain noises, that makes room for other sounds. You can fill up your mix more that way, and you get a fuller sound in the end. I also added a little bit of delay, some reverb. I used this EQ to get rid of all the lows to, as I said earlier, make room for the other sounds. And then I just sidechained it. So yeah, that is how I built the drop. So the next part of the track I want to get into is really the break. Now when it comes to this break, I'm not going to talk too much about this vocal, because I kept it very close to the original vocal. I didn't do much to change these vocals. I like the way they sound. I like the way they sound within this remix, so I didn't do much to change them. With this, I just added some delay. I did work to get rid of the lows, just to make room for the rest of my sounds. And then I also sent it to a reverb bus, which this compressor, it's actually not routed to my ghost kick. I don't even have a ghost kick playing in this section. Oh wait, yes I do. Yes I do. But this one is not routed to the ghost kick. This is actually routed to the vocal itself. So then you'll only hear the reverb really pick up when the vocals aren't coming through. So you hear the dry signal much louder when it's actually playing, and then once it kind of cuts out, then you'll hear the wet reverb signal build up. And this is a reverb technique that's used by a lot of artists. Almost every big artist uses it. So yeah, I use Space Designer. I used a lot of Space Designer on this track. I think every single reverb that I did on this track was using this plugin. I then EQ'd the reverb signal, just to get the frequencies that I wanted. And then, like I said, I sidechained it back to the vocal sample itself. So this is what it sounds like. So obviously the reverb and delay are pretty strong. And that's because this vocal stem already is processed. There's already a reverb tail on it and everything. I just added a lot more to it. So this is what it sounds like without my processing. And this is it with it. So yeah, it doesn't really change the sound much. It just adds to the reverb signal that's already there. So I'm not going to go over that vocal sound much more. This is the sound that I really built my break around. This is where I started it all. It's using this sound. The plugin I used for this sound is the same plugin I used for the piano and the drop. It's called Keyzone Classic, and it's a free plugin too. It comes with 5 different keyboard sounds. They all sound great to me. I love this plugin, and I pretty much use it in every track now. So yeah, that's like the main sound, and then I also layered it with this pad. I did a lot of filter automations on this track, just to keep a lot of movement, make it sound really interesting. So yeah, those two work together really well. I also have this ARP on my break. And that's more of a background sound, it's not one that you really notice, but it serves a purpose in the mix. On top of that, I also have these strings playing. And I didn't use any fancy strings plugins for those. I actually just used the Logic stock sampler that comes with those these string sounds in it. And then about halfway through the break, this piano comes in. And obviously I didn't do much to this sound either. It has a reverb bus. I put some delay on it, and I EQ'd it. So then I didn't want the full piano sound, I just wanted a certain portion of it for it to fit well in this mix. So this is what it'll sound like with the rest of the sounds. So the piano itself, it's not even a very noticeable sound, but it's there and it serves a purpose. Like this is what it sounds like without it. And then when it comes in. When the piano comes in, I also have this guitar come in. If you're a fan of Justin Milo or Mesto, you probably have seen this plugin before. This is where I saw it. It's another free one, and it's not the most realistic sounding guitar, but it does sound nice, and it worked in this setting, I think. Excuse me. And then the way I get like the finger picking sound out of this guitar is all in the MIDI here. I have it following the same chords that I'm playing with all the other sounds, except obviously it's not just one static chord. You can see the varying rhythm, and that's where the whole like kind of finger picking sound comes in. So yeah, there's my guitar. And then just to kind of fill out the whole frequency spectrum, I have this kind of sub bass that I use in the break. I also have a lot of these like reversed effects from sounds to transition into a sound whenever it comes in. Like when the vocals come in, I have this sound. You can hear how it builds into the vocal itself. For the strings, I have this one. And for the piano, there's this one. And obviously the effects that I used on the break are very simple as well. So is the percussion. We just have a snap here. And then this percussion loop comes in. And this percussion loop actually came from the original song. It was in the stems that came with the competition, and I liked the sound of it, so I kept it. Really, this loop and the vocals were all I kept from the original song. So that's my first break. The second break, it has the same foundation of the sounds. There's still the piano, the strings, this main sound that I was using, the sub bass, this pad, and this ARP. Except I also bring in this synth right here. And this is one of the factory sounds that comes with Silent One, which I don't use these sounds very often, but I did like the sound of this one, so I decided to keep it. And then this is where it gets a lot more orchestral. I have this string pattern coming, which is following the exact same pattern that was being played by the synth. And this is actually not being played by a string plugin. This is actually a silent patch, and it's one of the factory presets also. And I normally wouldn't use Silent for a string sound, but I really like the sound of that one, so I decided to keep it. And then I also have a lot more orchestral percussion coming in here. So then you put that all together right over here, and it sounds like this. And I do like the sound of this part of the track a lot. I really like those strings that come in. I really like the sound of those. So those are really the basic elements to how I made this track. The last thing I really want to go over is how I did my mastering. Now, I'm not like a professional mastering engineer or anything like that. For the most part, when it comes to mastering, I'm kind of clueless. I just get like the basic concept of it. I understand that you want to kind of clean up the frequencies a little bit with some EQing. You want to put some compression on your signal, and you want to use a limiter to add volume. So I start out with this EQ. All I have here is just a low cut in the very, very low end, just because these frequencies aren't even audible. So when you eliminate them from the mix, it leaves more room for the other frequencies. You don't have frequencies fighting with each other, and it just kind of cleans up the signal a little bit. Next, I use Logic's stock compressor just to kind of bring the whole sound of the track overall together. But this isn't any strong compression or anything. Like you can see here that it's really not taking any more than 4 decibels off of the signal. Next, I use the King from WA Productions, and I was using this completely for the multi-band compression in it. So you can see that this plugin actually did quite a bit to the signal too. Like if I turn it off, this really did a lot in making it sound the way it does now. And for this, I did start with one of the presets. I went through every single preset in this plugin to see which one sounded the best to me. And this one did the mastering full 1. Oh, I did not mean to do that. Yeah, that was a mistake. Oops. But yeah, after I did that, I found the sound that I liked with it. I found the preset that sounded the best to me, and from that point, I started to tweak it to make it sound even better. So in my opinion, it was just compressing way too hard on the high end, so I eased up on that a little bit, and I wanted the bass to be a little bit more powerful, so I added to the gain here in the low region. Next, I used Pumper from WA Productions, and I know this isn't a mastering plugin, but I really like the sound of the saturator from it, so I only use this plugin for the saturation. I obviously didn't touch the compression knob or the stereo image knob. I just completely used this plugin for the saturation. Next up, I use this free plugin called Limiter number 6. I really like the sound of this limiter. It does a great job of adding a lot of volume to it. And it just works in a way that, in my opinion, the Logic stock limiters can't do. You know, before I started using this plugin, I was trying to master with Logic stock limiters, and it would say 0 decibels in the stereo out, and on the stereo out track. But it was just never sounding loud enough to me. It was never getting to the volume I needed it. So this just did so much more. And if I turn this off, like, you can see how much volume it really adds. So yeah, this limiter is really essential to the overall volume I get for this song. And then finally, the last thing I did for mastering on this song is I use this plugin called Wave Shaper. It's another free plugin, and I only used it for this hard clipping setting. And I actually saw this plugin for the first time in a mastering tutorial video from WA Productions, where they were using it specifically for the hard clipping I don't even know how to describe it. I guess it just adds more power to the overall signal. And so I figured I'd give it a try. So this is the first time I ever got to use it on this track, and I probably will continue to use it in mastering in the future. So yeah, that's all the processing I did for mastering on this song. I will take off all these plugins, and you can hear what it sounded like before that, and then I will turn them on so you can hear what it sounds like with them. So yeah, you can tell from that, like, how important the mastering really is for the final overall product that I have here. And it's important to know too that you need to focus on making your mix down as good as it can possibly be before you actually try mastering your song. Because if you're finding issues in your mixdown, don't assume that you can just fix it in mastering. Fix it there before you get to it, and that's going to lead to a better overall master. And this plugin here I did not use for mastering. is just a filter that I have on the build-up to kind of cut out the lows. And when you cut out the lows on your build-up, that'll make the initial hit of the drop sound much more powerful. Just because you're taking away frequencies as it goes up, and then when that initial hit of the drop hits, it's just the full frequency spectrum, and that just makes it gives it the illusion of it being more powerful than it really is. A lot of producers use this technique, even DJs, they'll do it live, where Laidback Luke even talked about it in one of his videos one time, where he said going into the drop on the build-up, he'll like slowly turn the bass knob down on his mixer, and then he'll put it back at full volume at the hit of the drop. So I'll show you how this filter kind of works on this build-up. So yeah, that's just there to give the illusion of the drop being more powerful than it really is. And that's all I have to go over for this project. Now, for the future of this series, I don't know that I am going to do an episode like this for every single track I put out. But maybe we'll see how it goes. But yeah, I hope that even though I'm not a professional, that there can still be something taken from this, because I think there's always something that you can learn from somebody, especially in a more creative field like this. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed me going through how I made this track. If you want to listen to the full track that I have out, it's available on my SoundCloud. And if you like the sound of it, it is available as a free download. You can download it directly off of SoundCloud. So yeah, that is where I'm going to end it for now. I look forward to continuing to make more music and put more music out and make more episodes like this for those songs that I put out. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed.